Josh Hokit will overwhelm Curtis Blaydes.
Listen, I'm gonna take out number 4 and I'm gonna saw off his head and put it on Alex Pereira's body. I will show everybody that I'm the best from the east to the west.
Blaydes vs Hokit are set for the main card of UFC 327, and although a lot of fans think this is too big of a step up in competition for Hokit, I'm here to tell you that Josh will not only win, but he'll overwhelm Curtis Blaydes as well. But quickly, before we get the video started, my name is JuicyMMA. I make opinionated fight breakdowns. If you're ready, hit that subscribe button, and let's get right into it. When the UFC originally announced Josh Hokit vs Curtis Blaydes, it was a bit of a shock to me, as traditionally when you talk about some of the younger prospects that the UFC has, they usually go in one of two ways. Either one, give that prospect a bunch of layup fights against essentially non-UFC caliber fighters, or two, they give that prospect an older legend that has no business being in the top half of his particular weight class. And we saw exactly that in the recent matchup between Israel Adesanya and Joe Pyfer. But when you talk about this fight between Josh Hokit and Curtis Blaydes, neither one of those criterias match this fight. As Curtis Blaydes, for one, is a legitimate top 5 guy at this heavyweight division, but for two, although he is a little bit older, I wouldn't consider him washed or too old by any means. So essentially what that signals to me is the UFC has a ton of confidence in Josh Hokit. But a question that some of you may be wondering at this point is, why specifically do I think Josh Hokit is going to overwhelm Curtis Blaydes? Well, in my opinion, this comes down to a couple different factors, but the first factor that I want to touch upon is the pressure. As when you watch Josh Hokit fight out there, everything is based off of his pressure. Once he's able to pressure his opponents alongside the cage, that's where he goes to work. He's able to land big shots up top, he's able to shoot in effectively for takedowns, he can wrestle, he can do essentially whatever he wants, and it's all based upon that pressure. And when you also take a look at Curtis Blaydes, there have been multiple times in the past where he struggled significantly actually with the pressure. As if you look back at his fight against Almeida was able to do a very similar thing, as Jailton was able to pressure Curtis Blaydes alongside the cage, and from there he was able to have a lot of success shooting in for takedowns. Now eventually he ended up getting TKO'd alongside the cage, but I think that's more of a Jailton Almeida issue. I don't think many other fighters would end up in a similar situation to that. So I definitely do think the pressure is going to be a big factor in this fight. But the next factor for why I think Josh Hokit is going to overwhelm Curtis Blaydes is due to the speed. As although Josh Hokit is somewhat small for the heavyweight division, he does have his advantages, and the biggest advantage that he does have is that speed. And I think that speed is going to show up in a couple of different ways. For one, he's just going to land first. I think there's going to be multiple scenarios where both Blaydes as well as Hokit are throwing at the same time, and in those moments, Hokit is always going to land the bigger shots first, and based upon that, he'll have a better chance of actually finding finishes in those moments. And we saw a very similar thing when Curtis Blaydes fought against Tom Aspinall, as Curtis was actually landing some good shots early, but eventually he ended up getting TKO'd because Tom Aspinall's hand speed was significantly faster, and he was eventually able to land that one big seminal blow to find the finish. But for two, I think the fact that Hokit is so much faster will allow him to shoot in for takedown shots quickly against Curtis Blaydes and find them with a lot more success. And as I mentioned before, if you look back to the fight against Jailton Almeida and Curtis Blaydes, outside of just the physical strength, a big reason for why Jailton was able to constantly find takedowns alongside the cage was because he was so much faster than Curtis Blaydes. And once again, I think we're going to see a similar thing here in this fight versus Hokit and Blaydes. But the next factor for why I think Josh Hokit is going to overwhelm Curtis Blaydes comes down to the wrestling. Now, I know I alluded to this before, but essentially the more takedowns that Hokit's able to find, the less risk he would have going forward. As on the feet, Curtis Blaydes is a legitimately very hard puncher, and outside of that, he's also relatively technical. So the longer theoretically the fight stays on the feet, the more of a chance Curtis Blaydes would have to land that one big seminal blow. But because Josh Hokit has great pressure, because he's very fast, because he has great wrestling pedigree, I do believe he'll be able to find takedowns and essentially just go to work and eliminate risk on the ground. Now, the next factor that I want to touch upon for why I think Josh Hokit is going to overwhelm Curtis Blaydes comes down to Curtis Blaydes' fight IQ. Now, I've touched upon this a bunch in videos and even live streams, but I personally think Curtis Blaydes is a very talented fighter. On the feet, he has a lot of power, he's relatively technical, he moves somewhat well, he has pretty good offensive wrestling. There's a lot to like about the game of Curtis Blaydes. But with that being said, it seems as if whenever he goes up against super high level competition, he always makes a huge mistake. And that huge mistake either gets him finished in certain fights or just loses him the fights in general via a decision. So going into this fight against Josh Hokit, because of the pressure and activity, essentially I feel as if Hokit is going to force Curtis Blaydes into making some sort of mistake, whether that gets him finished or whether that allows Josh Hokit to cruise his way to a decision victory. But if I had to give my official prediction for this matchup, I would lean towards a Josh Hokit decision victory. Essentially, I feel as if Hokit is going to fight in a very similar manner to what Colby Covington was able to do when he was in his prime. Hokit's going to be pressuring Blaydes alongside the cage, throwing a couple of big shots up top, shooting in for a bunch of takedowns, finding some, failing on some, but essentially he's going to force Curtis Blaydes to work as long as possible, and eventually there's going to be that moment where Blaydes is really tired in the fight and Hokit is going to cruise his way to a decision victory, the biggest victory of his UFC career by far at that point. But if Josh Hokit's able to put on a really good performance over Curtis Blaydes, I think that'll really signal there's new blood at the heavyweight division. As I've talked about this a lot on live streams as well as videos, but the current heavyweight division is absolutely terrible. You have Tom Aspinall at the top and a couple of other additional fighters that I would consider to be pretty good, but outside of that class of, let's say, 3 fighters, everybody else essentially at the heavyweight division sucks. So all of a sudden, if you added an additional really good fighter to the heavyweight division in Josh Hokit, that brings a lot of new energy to the weight class. As for one, you can put together fights between Volkov and Josh Hokit, you can put fights together between Cyril Gane and Josh Hokit, and eventually, assuming Tom Aspinall stays as the champion, you could put together a big fight between Josh Hokit and Tom Aspinall. The more competition you add to this weight class, and the more super high level fighters you add to this weight class, the better it's going to get. So I do think Josh Hokit beating Curtis Blaydes and putting on a great performance against him would actually be huge for the UFC as a whole. But I guess only time will tell what does end up happening at UFC 327 as well as in the heavyweight division in general. But anyways, if you want my full best bets for every card, those are only in the Juicyverse membership. That's where I go way more in depth than I can here on YouTube. And for the Juicehead members, I also drop exclusive deep dive breakdowns on the biggest fights that I don't post publicly. So if you want to take your picks to the next level and get all the extra content, hit that join button down below. Shout out to all the current members, I really appreciate you guys for supporting the channel. But anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you think Josh Hokit is going to be able to overwhelm Curtis Blaydes, or do you not think so? But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did enjoy, check one of these 2 videos popping up now, and until the next time, peace out guys.